Hi, I'm Eric Gurr. I'm challenging John Boehner for the Republican nomination in the 8th District of Ohio. I want to talk today about one of the primary differences between Mr. Boehner and I and how it'll affect your life. The three biggest challenges facing the United States today would be a second banking crisis, similar to the one we had in 2008, a debt default, or a currency crisis. Now, in the banking crisis in 2008, what was done was the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department worked together and created some government bonds that they gave to the banks. Now, that was supposed to be spread throughout the economy and cause the economy to grow. It did not. Now, the reason for this is this was tried once before by a guy named Ben Strong back in the 20s when he was the head of the Federal Reserve Bank. And just like back then, the banks used it to fix their own balance sheets. So all the money printing that's gone on has only increased the M2 money supply by about 6%. So with those bank bonds now being looked at as assets and fixing the bank's balance sheets, it may look like a banking crisis is not very likely. And on its own, that's probably true. However, if we have a debt default, and this doesn't have to mean an entire debt repudiation, even if we have renegotiation of certain parts of the debt. In other words, we owe somebody $10 billion because they have government bonds and we say we can only pay you $9 billion. That would be another crisis because those bonds are what's supporting the banks. So right now, if we have a debt crisis or a debt default or repudiation of any kind, we're also going to have a banking crisis. Now, the third thing that we're confronted with is a currency crisis or a collapse of the currency. If the people around the world or in the United States believe that our currency no longer holds the value it did a few weeks ago, or believe that in the future it won't hold that value, then they will have less confidence in it. When that happens, obviously they're going to be less likely to buy our debt, government bonds, so we'll have to raise the interest rates, or we'll default on the debt, which will cause a banking crisis. Now, I'm sure Speaker Boehner knows that all these things are risks as well. Probably a lot of Republicans understand this, even the ones in the establishment side of the party, or rhinos as some would call them, that seem to be more willing to work with Democrats for more spending and push this off and kick the can down the road a little while longer. So the difference between Mr. Boehner and I is that I think we're already past that point. I think we've kicked the can past the end of the road. No nation can know what its real tolerance for debt is until after the collapse. So it makes sense, pragmatically, to start addressing the problem as soon as you see it arise. I would not have done this latest Ryan Murray deal. I wouldn't have increased the debt limit, and I would have fought a lot harder to stop Obamacare. Defunding it is only a start. It needs to be repealed. It isn't going to work anyway. But amnesty is also, at its core, economics. It is an economic bill. Bringing more people into the supply of labor when demand is already low is going to put more pressure on the economy and more pressure on the taxpayers who are already working. All these things working together would seem to indicate it might be prudent to take some corrective action now. We need to make our case so that all of America knows that these are real and tangible risks we're facing. Argentina defaulted on its debt in 1957 at less than 50% debt to GDP ratio. We are much higher than that. Now, on the news media, you'll hear them say we have $17 trillion in debt. Well, that's not quite true. We're much higher than that. We come up with that $17 trillion number because we don't include Social Security and Medicare. Now, any business that tried to do their accounting that way would probably end up in jail. So if Mr. Boehner is wrong, then we could have another banking crisis, a default on our debt, repudiation, or at least a renegotiation, which will cause a banking crisis, or in the worst case, a complete collapse of our currency. If I'm wrong, and you endorse me and support my candidacy, well, the worst that's going to happen is we're going to have less spending, less government regulation, lower taxes, and yes, a few thousand workers in Washington, D.C. are probably going to lose their jobs. Most of us in the private sector deal with that every single day. That difference may not seem like much. He believes we have time. I don't. But it is big. It is a big difference. even if you can't decide for sure which one of us is right, I would ask you this: which path is less risky? Mr. Boehner's path, and Harry Reid and John McCain and others that believe we can work our way through this, is essentially a game of dice. They're hoping for the best. My path is let's be prudent, let's cut real spending now, let's make some tough decisions. All debts are reckoned, one way or the other. Right now we have an opportunity to fix this. We can decide what gets cut. If we wait, we won't get that choice anymore. The people who buy our bonds, the banks that lend money, will make the choice for us. Again, my name is Eric Gurr, and this is one of the primary reasons I'm challenging Mr. Boehner. I think career politicians are not the right people to have in office when there's a real crisis. We need fresh thinking. We need to look at things from a different perspective. I'll bring that perspective to Washington, D.C., and I think it'll help make a positive change, not just for those of us in the 8th District of Ohio, but for the entire nation. And this is an issue that surely you can understand affects your life. If there's one issue we must all agree affects all of our lives, it is the long-term economic viability and sustainability of this nation. Thank you for your time.